Geothermal energy in all of its forms, from direct use heat to electricity production, has been described as a sleeping, clean energy giant. Geothermal is ubiquitous, unlimited, and available 24/7. And importantly, the skill set and expertise overlap between the geothermal and oil and gas industries means that there is an existing industry with global presence and a highly skilled workforce poised to push geothermal development. What will it take to scale geothermal energy globally from gigawatts to terawatts in the coming years? How can oil and gas industry assets, technologies, expertise, and workforce be applied to make geothermal go exponential? Who will be the players in this green drilling boom? And is geothermal the missing piece in the energy transition puzzle? Let's explore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the opening panel of Pivot 2021, Geothermal Energy at Oil and Gas Scale. How do we get there? My name is Rebecca Schultz. I will be your panel moderator to kick us off. To introduce myself, I'm a secondee at the International Energy Agency, supporting fuel supply and investment. I'm also the co-chair of the Society of Petroleum Engineers Geothermal Working Group and the chair for its post-COP26 workshop, SBE 21, Bridging the Gap, aimed at diving further into this panel topic. Today, we're going to dive into this high-level vision of how oil and gas global presence, its skills, and its ways of working could help geothermal scale globally to meet long-term energy demand. What role could industry organizations, governments, the financial community, and others play to enable this growth? Please do have a listen, submit your questions, and we'll be getting to those in the second half of our time together. Our esteemed panelists come from some of the largest oil and gas service sector companies, and each brings a different perspective to the table on how geothermal and oil and gas can learn and leverage from each other. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panelists, starting with Ajit Menon from Baker Hughes. Ajit, welcome to Pivot 2021. Can you please take a moment to introduce yourself, your role at Baker Hughes, and perhaps give us a feel for Baker Hughes' role in geothermal?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. And I'm really honored and appreciate the invite to participate in this panel. So as Rebecca said, my name is Ajit Menon, and I work for Baker Hughes, and I lead our geothermal segment within Baker Hughes. Now that spans what we do in terms of subsurface evaluation, well construction, and also as an OEM on turbines and rotating equipment on the power generation side on surface. In terms of where our focus is, it's really on the development and application of technology in all those areas in order to grow the geothermal space together with our customers and to be a technology partner for geothermal project developers. I've been in the company 25 years and have, engaged both on the geothermal side as well as oil and gas. And I'm currently based in Houston. So that's a quick introduction to me.
Thanks, Ajit. And I am honored to be able to introduce our next panelist. From Neighbors, we have Ziggy Mesner. Ziggy, can you come on and please introduce yourself as well?
Rebecca, thanks, and thanks for having me on this panel. My name is Ziggy Meissner. I've been in Neighbors, I think, more than 28 years. I've been very fortunate over my career. I've been working with teams that were always driven by technology, by high performance. So you may think that Neighbors started thinking about the geothermal or clean energy solutions after we had the freeze here in Houston in February. In fact, this is not right. We actually started more than a year ago to look at how we make our rigs cleaner, how we can make an impact out there. And so we have, in fact, so we developed a roadmap in this company, how we can apply our skill sets, our technology, our asset base, and our manufacturing skills to this requirement. And in fact, created a new division, which is called New Neighbors Energy. So I think this is the introduction at this point.
Thanks, Ziggy. And our third panelist, I'm honored to invite in Dr. Milos Milos onto the panel. Milos, can you please introduce yourself and your role and Halliburton's interest in geothermal?
Hello, Rebecca. Again, just like the other panelists, I want to say how pleased I am to have the opportunity to participate in Pivot 2021 and in this panel, and also see other panels as well. So I serve as the head of strategy for Halliburton and as the head of integrated well construction, tasked with the transformation of well construction using digital. We see geothermal as an exciting opportunity for the industry and for Halliburton. We are an active participant, and we see this as accretive to our existing businesses and a natural application of our skills and processes and technology. We have learned a whole lot from the unconventional revolution, reduced time and costs of drilling significantly. I think a lot of that can be applied to geothermal. We have a significant high temperature fleet, and we continue building on that base. Now that there is not a lot to be done, but we are engaging with existing clients who are expanding into this space and the new entrants who are seeking our input and participation in their projects. So I think it's exciting, and I would like to see this market grow and see oil and gas supply our skills and our assets to it.
Thanks, Milos. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the kickoff panel for Pivot 2021. We were just diving in with our panelists on the question of, for their specific entities, the companies they're coming from, what are the near-term strategies that their companies are interested in looking at? So what are they looking at in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? And Milos was just responding from the Halliburton side. So if we can, for just a minute, Milos, perhaps pick up where we left off. And then I'm quite curious to hear Ziggy's response on this as well. We're getting some great questions in from the audience, so we may transition to those afterwards.
So, thanks, Rebecca. Sorry for the interruption. So I'll start over this answer. So we are currently Halliburton, that is an active participant in the geothermal market. We have been for a long time. I have found evidence of work that we have done, nearly 60 years ago. And we are in Halliburton are experts in downhole, from understanding the subsurface, understanding the reservoir, understanding the rocks, and then efficiently executing drilling and then stimulation and completion and production. So we are looking to leverage those, and I think those are quite applicable. We have learned as much in the unconventionals and can bring very good processes to bear. If I would say just in the medium and long term, I believe, and I think the company believes as well, that the geothermal market is growing. There is every indication that that's the case. There needs to be R&D work done on high temperature tools that will let us go beyond 200 something to 50, 300 degrees C, where we can get to the reservoirs and to the temperatures that would really make it economical. So I see that in the medium and long term, and look forward to having this be an ever-growing part of our portfolio.
Thanks, Milos. Ziggy, can I toss this one over to you, because Nabors has quite some interesting investments going on in the short term, and so I'd love if you can touch on that a little bit. Tell us what's going on and what you're looking for, both in the short and long term.
So Nabors, just like Milos said, actually I also did some remember. Nabors, in our early years, we were, I think, one of the largest geothermal drilling contractor on the globe, and it was actually part of our investor presentation, saying that we are geothermal drillers. So I think we have history, but coming back to our strategy, I think our strategy right now is to really partner with companies that are involved in the geothermal business. So technology. Building a portfolio that addresses multiple technologies, if it's the more shallow application or the supercritical, and really get along with that. And then medium term, of course, to prove and develop this technology. And then the long-term strategy for Neighbors would be that we're going to be a player, not only in the execution and development on geothermal project, but also be a producing on the power side, participating in it.
Thanks, Ziggy. I'm going to open
Rebecca,
up.
if I can,
Yeah,
if I
please.
can just add one more thing. So I think it's fairly exciting with the growth of importance in geothermal in everyone's minds. You know, whether it's be the technology, the availability of energy, the regulators. Anyway, there are a number of new entrants coming into this space with innovative technologies, and I think that's great, great for the industry, great for the globe. And we are engaging with them. They're seeking out our expertise, and we are looking to help. So,
Thanks,
Yes.
Milos.
Same with us. It's really using what you have, integrating in what you have, and then really develop jointly what is out there. It's really exciting times.
Yeah, partnering is going to be critical in this space, and we're doing the same, just like Ziggy and Milos mentioned.
I'm curious, and I'm going to open this up to all of you. It's one of these billion-dollar questions. How much scale does oil and gas need to really dive into geothermal? So I know all of your entities are looking in geothermal. You're active in geothermal, but what metrics are you focusing on? Are you looking for megawatt thresholds before investing? Are you looking on a return on investment, bare minimum, or what is it that you're looking for?
Ajit,
Well,
you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think it's both. I think like as as the panel has mentioned, none of us are new to geothermal. In fact, we've been participating already for more than 40 years. Both on a simple small scale, up to like 4 years ago we were involved in the Iceland deep drilling project, drilling the longest, deepest, hottest well. So I think we, in the oil and gas industry, we know how we can participate in this space, whether on a small scale or large scale, and still deliver a viable business. So I would say we look just like we look at in oil and gas, we look the same way in geothermal at the economics, and it's not necessarily the size of the project that draws us in, right? For us, it's also the application of technology. A project of a few wells can bring as much value as a project, with a lot of wells delivering, megawatts, megawatt scale, would be my answer.
Thanks, Ajit. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
So I think, obviously in the oil and gas industry, we're used to high capex, and we have a certain discipline in the industry to get our return on our investment and things like this. But I think the geothermal maybe challenges us from the point that we still have to deal with high investment, but I think the payback period may be much longer. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges. And to me, scale means when I do something on a repetitive basis. So if I say I deliver 100, I can deliver 100 all the time. And I think that's when scalability comes into play. That's just my view on scaling things, so I can do things on a repetitive basis, and I think that's when the success eventually will come true.
Yeah, when your learning curves are increasing quite rapidly at that point. Yeah. Milos, anything you wanna add in on that?
Yeah, I would say that just like all the other work, this one competes as well on the merits of the business case, the return on investment. I think now with the growth in the upcycle, I would say, in the oil and gas industry, I think now the question is going to become the application of limited assets and people. What's the best investment of that? And we have to be looking at returns on investment for the company and for the industry. So I'd say that's one thing. The other one is we pride ourselves to be an execution company, but to Ziggy's point, that requires a repetitive nature, requires wells, requires learning from it. Not everything is the same between oil and gas and geothermal, right? There are many different particular things that we need to learn, and I think we just by repetition, we get better. And so far, I mean, I've seen wells, I've seen opportunities, but it's not at scale that competes really with what we do every day with oil and gas.
Thanks, Milos. I want to touch on a point that I think Ziggy had raised earlier and talked a little bit about funding and investment. Where is this funding, do you see, going to come from in the minds of yourselves? Where do you see, and how does that financing perhaps differ from what oil and gas have typically done or used in the past?
I think I can start off on that one. Just recently, we've seen the European Commission issue their new set of recommendations on, I think it's called Fit for 55, I believe, and includes a whole lot of funding and goals that the European Union has. So I think the funds are going to be available. I know that the European Commission is also encouraging nation states to contribute and max that out. We've seen private equity come into this space. IOCs are funding some of the new entrants with the new technologies. So it seems like the funding is there. I think the question is, with the governmental funding, it's going to be how to connect and synergize with those regulators and municipalities, and then also with the VCs and private equity, how to maximize the returns. So I think there's some work to be done, but it seems like the money and the investment is growing in the area.
Yeah, Europe is a good example, right? So I think it's fair to say that a lot of the geothermal projects are kicking off because of the funding is available, and there's preferred pricing on the kilowatt hours, so it makes the project feasible. And I think that's how things get started. For example, in Germany, I know there's some projects really taking off now for that very reason.
Thanks, Ziggy. Ajit, did you have something you wanted to? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I wanted to add. I think as the other panelists have said, the funding is there, and government funding has been critical, and we've worked with the German government, as Ziggy has mentioned, on that. But what I would say also is, with the VC and private equity funding coming into the market, one of the challenges we see is that funding, while it's there, tends to only be available once the opportunity is a sure thing. And I think, and that's why I really think, the focus on better resource assessment earlier in the game can help free up that funding for the initial phases of the project, which we feel is really critical. So, the funding is there, but, the level of risk appetite of new investment, that's something we have to help as an industry address through reducing risk.
Thanks, Ajay. I see that we've got David Reed that's joined us, perhaps. David, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Hi, David. Perhaps can you introduce yourself and give just one brief moment, some background around yourself and NOV and where NOV fits within this geothermal landscape?
Okay, well, I'm David Reed. I'm the CTO and CMO for NOV. We've been in geothermal for quite some time. Of course, we're starting to see some really good breakthroughs now, and we're pretty excited about what we could do differently in geothermal. So that's a good place for us. And I think even to the question you were just asking, there's the traditional approach of let's get the funding we need to make the bridge to make this economical. But I think some of the breakthrough ideas, I think that's where the real opportunities are. Is can we produce volume with innovation? So that's really where our long-term hopes are, and then our short-term just enabling work. We've been doing some good work in that space.
Thanks, David. There's a fun question that I want to ask all of you. I don't know if you're all going to be ready with the answer, but I guarantee if I come up to you in another week, you're going to have the answer. A question came across from the audience on what is the deepest, hottest well that your company has been involved with drilling. So if you know it, go ahead and shout it out. Ajit, I know you mentioned Iceland, so I know there's some pretty hot ones in there, but anybody want to go first?
Well, I can just elaborate on that. So we were involved in, it's like 4 years ago now, in providing the drilling services for the Iceland Deep Drilling Project. And that was, the longest, deepest, hottest geothermal well drilled at the time. And for that work, we had developed specifically, metal to metal mud motors and drill bits that work at 300 degrees C. So, that was technology that was developed specifically for a geothermal application, right? So that's what I know about that. I could give you more details, but like everyone, like you just said, I would take some time to have to research it.
So Ajit's got Iceland. We know it's pretty hot. Ziggy, do you happen to know? Do you have a location or a temperature depth?
Yeah, I know that we're having high temperature, high pressure rigs working around the globe. And I just picked up my iPhone actually and asked somebody if they can give me the quick information, but I don't have it yet. So
okay,
I'll be back to you in that case.
Anyone else have it?
I don't have it, but like Ziggy, I'm asking to find out.
We'll come back.
We'll come back.
David, if I can perhaps direct a question at you for this one. Where do you see, just briefly, where do you see as being the low-hanging fruit? Having worked with the industry, especially, well over the last 20 plus years, very involved in the unconventional side. What do you see as being the low-hanging fruit?
Well, the immediate stuff is in temperature. Obviously, there's things we can do and are doing that is proving out in the existing traditional geothermal world. But I think that's the low-hanging fruit that gets you extra tools out. What we've been finding is as you break through a new technology in temperature, actually a traditional technology with higher temperature application, it just means there's a new problem, and so you're starting to go down the road of, okay, what's the next thing that's failing? And so that's kind of the immediate stuff. But I do think where real investment will get exciting is when you start looking at the ability to do large quantities, where particularly in the not so hot range, starting to deal with temperatures that we're used to drilling in regular shales even. It just produces that much heat potential, or at least energy potential. And so I think all of the technologies playing in that space in the longer game are really why we're interested in the volume potential there. I think that's quite a rich market for everybody up ahead.
Thanks, David. That's a good one. I'm gonna shift gears with us a little bit, if I may, away from the technical side of it. I want to talk a little bit about the non-technical side, because scaling up an industry is not just about innovation; it's also about regulatory and other aspects. One of the questions that we have from the audience is, how does geothermal work? Just give me a little moment. How does geothermal work with mineral rights on land ownership? And so how does the legal or land side come into play? So what risks do you see with respect from perhaps more of a legal or regulatory side of this with respect to geothermal, and really being able to scale that up in a global sense?
Well, I'll say it's evolving. It's still new, particularly when you start looking at scale. There's a whole lot that we don't know in that space. So, I mean, as it stands, you're going to deal with existing regulations. So the drilling regulations, particularly when you're looking at the large volume work that people are thinking about, they're going to be adequate for what we're dealing with. And so I think we're actually covered that way. I don't think there's a new regulation that's necessarily needed. That's my opinion anyway.
I think there are a couple of things, Rebecca. I mean, first, it's the mineral rights, but this is where the regulators come in. This is where the municipalities come in and state governments to provide those. But then there is the entire chain. It's not just the mineral rights, but also what are you going to do with that energy? I mean, are you going to connect to some surface systems? What is the price that's going to be paid for that energy? I think that's so there is a whole ecosystem, and not to mention that if we are looking at these relatively low temperature applications, they need to be close to urban centers. So So there are a whole lot of zoning issues as well. So.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I would add an aspect of legal, that has really nothing to do with mineral rights. But if you look at the geothermal space compared to oil and gas, there's a lot of public institutions and government funding involved. That creates different, legal terms and contracting terms that service companies have to get comfortable with and figure out how to navigate. So I think when I look at from a legal perspective, and I am sure there'll be like David said, we just don't know a lot of this, especially on the mineral rights side. But what we do see with the amount of government funding coming in is that we as an industry and the funders need to work out a way that's mutually beneficial from a legal perspective that we can work together.
But just to be clear, Rebecca, I don't think that we as Halliburton are looking to acquire mineral rights or be providers in that sense. I mean, we're looking to play a part in the supply chain, but similarly like to oil and gas. I mean, we don't own necessarily oil and gas. So.
Exactly.
I think that besides the legal aspect, I think there's another big element that needs to be discussed, and I think it's the way like solar and wind work with baseload energy, because geothermal clearly is a baseload power supply, and I think there is at the moment maybe, I don't know how to say it properly, but I don't think the different sources of energy are treated equally. And I think the geothermal is not treated the same way than maybe wind power or solar power at this point. And so there's a big difference providing power on a consistent basis or just provide it when it's available. And I think it creates some complications on the grid and in general for the energy supply overall.
So maybe that brings to another question that's come up from the audience that perhaps dives into your point, Ziggy, as well. And the question states that, so in the USA, could there be a bipartisan political consensus for geothermal tax incentives, since the left sees geothermal as green and the right likes the fact that it's not intermittent like wind and solar, and it also utilizes oil and gas talent?
I think there's already policy lining up for that. I mean, I think people don't think geothermal enough, and that's one of our challenges, is that the steady understanding and growth and investment in solar and wind make it very much more familiar. But I think it's lined up for this to work.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I would say that the short answer is yes. And we've seen that already in other, spaces, while not directly related, where CCUS, legislation was introduced by previous administration and it's carried on now. In geothermal as well, when we look, at geothermal applications in the Arctic Circle, remote communities, we see definitely bipartisan support for those initiatives. So I think the short answer is absolutely yes.
I think that this is an opportunity to employ oil and gas professionals in a new market that provides energy, affordable energy. I think it's an opportunity to provide jobs, well-paying jobs. So I don't see it as a left or a right issue. I think I see it as an opportunity, that we have a resource right here beneath our feet that we can exploit and gain energy independence, if you want to look at it in those terms as well.
And there's a huge push from the government anyways, and I think it is bipartisan to see oil jobs convert, and so it works in our favor very well. And I think the policies are going to continue to come out that will reward any kind of using of our existing skills or our existing labor force. So I think it's all good. I think it's very positive when you look at that from a government perspective.
So I think I know from Germany it took a long time, I believe, to get permits. So I think there's maybe a lesson learned, to get for the geothermal projects. Maybe existing oil and gas licenses can be extended to geothermal. Maybe there's a simple way to just keep the permit process simple as possible. And typically that happens if the government is behind it. So
That's a great answer, Ziggy. All great answers. Anything else to add into that? Sorry, Milos, please.
Yeah, I do want to add that, I think this is an area where in the US, I think we need to be putting more focus and more funding in. And, I think if the government or entities associated or, private investors were to step in, I think we can really accelerate. We don't want to be falling behind the rest of the world or developed world in this area. I think we have the technology, we have the people. I think we can make some progress.
Those are all great answers. Thanks, Jens. We'd spoken a bit before the panel. There's a question that we talked about that I'd like to dive into, if I may, and it's around partnerships and how to scale up. Because really, it's one thing to talk about strategy and what the strategies are, but it's an entirely different thing to implement your strategies. So, what are the key partnerships that you see being essential to implement your geothermal growth strategies? Ajit, perhaps can I hand this one to you to kick us off?
Sure. So, I think partnerships are essential, and actually it's something that we've seen in geothermal that we can learn from, right? Because it's smaller, it's a small close-knit group of people working in geothermal. We see close collaboration and partnerships across geothermal with customers, with investors, I think are going to be very important, with the investment community, with like all the phases that I talked about, right? Like say project de-risking, working with, resource assessment groups, working with the investment community at that stage, like partnerships on the new frontier side, as I think Milos mentioned earlier, there are companies that are engaged on niche specific technology developments, and partnering them can really help advance the development at scale of those new frontier segments, EGS, AGS, and even on the direct use side for district heating. So I think partnerships across the board are important, because none of us can do everything. And, we have to come back to the fundamental challenge that we face in geothermal when all is said and done. Whatever subsidies we get and the rest is to drive growth, we need to be cost competitive with other renewables, right? And to do that, it's going to take all of us working together, not in isolation, and partnering both with, us on the panel here, but in all elements, whether it be subsurface, well construction, as well as the the power generation phase, where you already have multiple groups that have to partner.
Anyone else want to add into that?
Yeah,
Go ahead, David.
I was going to say that we're already fairly partnering oil and gas. We're fairly good at it. But I have observed outside of geothermal and other renewables, a lot more openness. It seems like there's a lot of barriers down and a lot of more willingness to talk, because you're solving a bigger issue together. Mm-hmm. And so really seeing some good partnership work. I think we've got more to do in the geothermal space, but I do think people come together better, particularly when it's a new barrier that you're trying to get through. A lot of players coming in, a lot of private-public partnership type conversations that we've never had in the past, and here we are doing that, having larger conversations with various governments, talking about funding from various places, and so I do think it's a lot more open as a potential for us to work together just to get the end result sorted out.
Thanks, David. Milos, you looked like you wanted to add into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, to the points that were raised, I mean, I agree with those. Just one more point, I'm a technologist at heart, so I really get excited about innovation and about new ways of doing things. So I think getting that partnership with those innovative companies that are starting up and proposing new solutions. I look at some of these closed loop systems, and get really excited, when I look at the potential. So I think that's a key partnership that we, have to nurture, going forward.
Thanks, Milos.
Yeah, I want to say the same thing. I think technology partnerships are key because somebody said on the panel that we can't do everything by ourselves. And then, like Milos said, there's so much innovation out there. It's actually really exciting to see that and integrate some of these technologies into what we have to make things successful out there. It's really exciting times. So I think that's the way we all have to go and work together on this to solve the issue.
Thanks, Ziggy.
I do think that we when it comes to IP, I mean, we find it too, when you have an invention and you think this is a great invention, we tend to bury and hide until we're ready. But I think it's time for that to change. And that is a culture thing that happens in oil and gas. And so there's room for opening up and innovation. And I'm driving internally to do the same, to bring more partners in to get things done faster. So just wanted to add that point.
Yeah, it's a good point, David. That also touches on some of the learning curves that we were talking about at the very, a little bit earlier before you were able to join us, because that collaboration can really bring those learning curves up much, much more quickly. Ziggy, there's a question here that perhaps I'd like you to kick us off with, if I may. The question is, are there differences between geothermal rigs and oil and gas rigs, and are the assets directly transferable? So a little bit of education for ourselves and our listeners.
So fundamentally, I think you can say an oil and gas rig can drill a geothermal well. As we drill deeper and deal with different temperatures, I think you have to make different arrangements on your rig. You have to provide cooling. You have to just adapt the rig to different things. So it's a different rig at the end. It's the same rig, but it has different features.
Thanks, Ziggy. There's a question I've been. Oh, sorry, David. Please go ahead.
One thing I may want to add. So.
Oh, sure.
We've been talking about the different depths that people are going to. So I think eventually, if we go, especially if you go supercritical temperatures and drill to these depths, I think you may also need to look at bigger rigs, because geothermal requires different hydraulics than what we see in oil and gas, and so you need to drill a bigger borehole, which requires a bigger machine, and so ultimately you may see a rig that is bigger than what we drill today in the US, for example.
That's a great answer. David, did you want to join in? I think perhaps we've lost David just briefly, but it brings me to a question raised by one of the audience as well of, does this mean that it's not necessarily deeper traditional geothermal formations and reservoirs that we're looking at? Do we need to move this transition into sedimentary basins even more quickly to help upscale this and move it forward?
I think that's one of the findings, right? That drilling in very hard rock, basement is not an easy thing, and we also know much more, I think, as an industry about sedimentary basins. And given that the energy seems to be ubiquitous, right? It seems like a great place to start, right? As opposed to start with drilling through extremely hard rock and figuring how to do that and how to do stimulation, etc.
I think, as we said earlier, this is one of the low-hanging fruits, in my opinion. The drilling in the formation that we're very familiar with, and I think that's where we can start today. And I think probably also gives us the economics that are less challenging than going all the way deep and very hot.
I think I agree with those statements. I think we have to look at that coupled with the new frontiers developments that are coming out, the new developments both in EGS and AGS to help support that, and also on the turbine side to deal with those, with heat transfer and with dealing with those, like potentially lower temperatures.
Thanks, Jens. I want to turn this around.
Even there, Rebecca, sorry, just to add something. I think as we go forward, I think there's going to be a need for more detailed understanding, I think, of the distribution, I would say, of these thermal parameters, in the crust, and understanding where it's most economical, and understanding, what kind of exploration and logging techniques do we need to fully understand, what is the conductivity, right? I mean, we've kind of looked at permeability, we've looked at porosity in the oil and gas space. That's not necessarily the case here. So I think there is some new knowledge to be developed and some new evaluation techniques.
I think that's very fair. I'm going to step us back just 1 minute and turn this conversation to the other side of the coin, and ask all of you to say, what is it that you see the oil and gas sector really needs to learn from the geothermal industry itself? We're used to drilling, we're used to completing and producing oil or gas and distributing it and selling it on the market. So what do we need to learn from geothermal?
So maybe I take this first, Rebecca. When I saw when you asked the question, my first thought was, is it the wrong way around? Is it? I was not sure. I think at this point we're still learning a lot about geothermal, but I think there's maybe more case to be made. What can be learned? What can the geothermal learn from the oil and gas, and how to apply things going forward to reach the economics, to be efficient, to make things happen in the right way. So I didn't answer your question, but I didn't know how to answer it, to be honest with you. So.
I'd like to go back to kind of what we said, what we talked about earlier with partnerships and collaboration. I think it's not a technical thing, but I think it's a soft, more cultural thing, that we can learn. Yes, we do partner quite effectively in oil and gas, but it really is different. The partnerships that I see and the collaboration I see in geothermal, because of the smaller, close-knit community, right? So I think we can certainly learn from there. And I think we also have an opportunity, there is a limited but very experienced skill set in delivering geothermal within the geothermal industry. And I think we have to learn from them. We can't just, transport oil and gas skill sets into geothermal. Yes, that's part of it, the training and development, but we also need to help harness and extend the capability of that learning that already exists. And, the infrastructure we've built for remote operations, that will help us do that, and also help us scale up, the expertise that's there today to be able to take on more projects. Because one of the things we've not talked about today is we can talk about scaling up from equipment, investment, CapEx, those things. But to effectively scale up today, you're going to need people as well. And today that geothermal community is limited and small. It's an opportunity to develop new talent, but in between, we've got to use these other techniques.
I'd like to add that one thing that I've learned from being around the geothermal community is that they're very welcoming and open, which I think sometimes a little bit of eye rolling, and I guess you guys are struggling with oil and gas since you turned out to help us, which is okay. But other than that, I mean, just if you've got something to contribute that's valuable, they've been really excited to see that. So when there's been investment and breakthrough, a lot of warmth, a lot of playing well together. Excuse me. But I think that's really been something I've seen that maybe comes out of their small nature of the existing business. Also very local, so they tend to work. They generally don't do much global view in the groups that we've dealt with, who are kind of the field groups. So there's more room for pulling everyone together. But I think that's something that they're just really willing to work with you. So I've definitely enjoyed that, and never felt. Sometimes in oil and gas, you feel like a lesser player, particularly when you're lower in the supply chain. But I've felt very equal coming in, which has been great for us.
Thanks, David. Milos, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, just one more point to everything that's raised. I wonder about the markets and the nature of the market, right? In the oil and gas, we are dealing with the global commodity, gas to some degree. Here it's very localized. We are used to ups and downs and overproduction and crashes. I really wonder how that's going to play out in the geothermal, and what is that nature of that market going to be, right? Is it going to be permanently supported by the governments, or is it going to have its similar kind of up and down nature to it? So.
And also thinking a bit on how the oil and gas industry learns the heat industry, learns the power industry. As Ziggy and I were talking about ahead of this session, we're not necessarily the foremost knowledge holders when it comes to building out, grids and transmission and distribution and understanding how all of that connects together. And that's something that Ziggy had raised when we were having our one-on-one that I thought is quite relevant to bring into the discussion.
That part we definitely have to learn, and for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of this again goes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David. Did you want to jump in?
It just fits into that. There's a lot of new language. There's a lot of new people we don't know. There's a lot of new practices. And so, yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot. And we have to go in listening and knowing, because we can easily think that we've got something to offer that is better or smarter, but really, at the end of the day, the listening part's really important, and the learning and understanding. And everyone who's playing and this and other spaces are talking, it's a new language, it's all new muscles that we've never really had. And so, yeah, there's a ton to learn in that space.
Yeah, it's a complete new customer base, really. It's a new customer base, in many cases very local. So it definitely things we have to learn.
I'm going to bring in one more question before we start to draw to a close. And the question goes back again to partnerships, but IP and collaboration. And while partnerships sound great, what about the intellectual property side of this? And how do we get around those challenges in an industry that is very competitive?
It's definitely not easy. That's why we're all quiet to start with. It is a challenge culturally, because that's where we've all kind of made our money, is in protecting and making sure we protect our ideas and our IP. But I do find, and I'm probably in more conversations now in the renewable space and geothermal, where it is complex and we're involving lawyers more, not in an ugly way, but just trying to work out what's the right dividing of who's inventing what when you're in partnership, which is a bit more complex than just doing it all yourself. So there's a little bit of learning how to do that, but I think it's worth the effort. Everywhere lately, I've been pushing in and making sure that even getting our legal departments who are large compared to the partners you're working with, is getting them to back off the trying to make sure everything falls in our favor kind of behavior, and into the make sure people get paid for what they've invented. And I think that's the work that we have to learn how to do that really well.
Yeah, I would add, I think what I've seen that's positive is, you have two parties, going into a joint collaboration or trying to develop something. And really the IP considerations are something that we have to work out, right, as part of that process. And we've seen it, like with partners coming from oil and gas and partners in the geothermal space. So I think that's positive. It's seen as something we have to work through rather than something that stops us doing, collaborating together. Because I think, going back, the partnership factor is going to be very real and very important for oil and gas players in this space.
I think as David said, I think sometimes just because maybe the oil service company is larger than the geothermal company doesn't mean that the legal side of the company has more muscle. And I think if you're really entering a true partnership, I think you find ways to jointly own IP, for example, or you find ways that make sense for both parties. But the focus should be to develop IP And of course, you have to think about the future when it comes to ownership of IP. But I think there's ways today to make this happen in a proper way in a good partnership.
I think that's right. We have a materials experience where, you know, in the hydrogen space, not geothermal, where we're bringing in a partner, but ultimately over time, as we've done more projects, it's turned into our lawyers are handling their IP with them, trying to help them, which, you know, it did not start that way. So that trust is a big part, as well as good behavior in the middle of it. So as long as everyone behaves and shows themselves to have integrity, and then there's a lot of opportunity to help each other and work together.
Thanks, David. We're going to have to start drawing to a close, and so I'm gonna end with a question to all of you, and perhaps because at the very beginning we started with Milos, so this time I'm going to start with Ajit. And the question goes into, for example, the IEA recently released their net zero by 2050 roadmap, and in that, geothermal plays a relatively small role to 2050. It grows, if you look at the last 30 years, geothermal power, for example, has grown about 3 times. In the IEA net zero report, it grows about 9 times to 2050, but that's a much, much smaller scale than most of its renewables brethren, if you will. And so can you give me a sense, in just a 1 minute close from each of you, of what, you know, if you envision a geothermal moonshot, what does that look like? And what would be the one thing that you think it would take to get us there?
Sure. So hopefully I can do this in 1 minute. So you know, like a geothermal moonshot for me would be that, you know, geothermal is an important and component of the base load renewables energy mix, right? And that spans from the big, large scale projects to the projects supporting isolated communities, whether in the Arctic or remote locations, utilizing microgrids. And that coupled with commercial at scale geothermal projects in EGS and AGS that really expand the extent of the geothermal market way beyond those IEA projections, right? So this is a moonshot, so I'm going for it. And a heating and cooling market where, especially in Western Europe and the Northern US, where geothermal is one of the primary sources of energy for heating and cooling. So that's what we see as the moonshot. And to get there in just one thing, for us, it's technology. As an energy technology company, that's what we do. And we really feel that's the solution. The development and application of technology to reduce costs, reduce uncertainty, and be able to make geothermal a competitive and important component and source of energy within the energy mix. So
thanks, Ziggy. It's a great answer. David, can I hand that one over to you? 1 minute to close that with your geothermal moonshot. And what's the one thing you think it would take to get there?
Well, for us, it's been picking a target that is, you know, pushes you beyond your normal trimming behavior of let's lower the cost here and there. So we've literally taken let's look at how do you halve the cost, and that's with any renewable energy. But geothermal has the best output, so it's one of the better players when it comes to delivering what the world needs. And so it's really taking a target and going after that from a, once again, technology standpoint and saying, what haven't we thought of that could be very different in this space? And I think you've got to push towards that. And I agree, it's got to be something that is globally accessible. So it's a change in thinking for geothermal into we've got the earth below us. Let's extract energy from that heat in a way that's economical. So that's really what we're trying to challenge ourselves with.
Thanks, David. Ziggy, can I hand it over to you? What's your geothermal moonshot? What's the one thing you think will take?
So to me, geothermal, as we already said, in quite a few places on the globe, geothermal is already applied. And I think we can base on that technology. I think to me, it's the new technology needs to be proven as quickly as possible and be applied in areas where we know what we're doing or try to have good understanding, like drilling in the sediment. That will be the immediate action that I would take or I would like to take to participate in.
Thanks, Ziggy. And Milos, can you close us out? Geothermal moonshot.
Thank you. So I think the lack of geothermal for electricity generation is a miss in all the reports that I've seen. I think this is something that we need to reconsider, and perhaps I wonder if it's a matter of communication and information and kind of making the regulators understand what is possible, because I think it's possible, quite a bit is possible. So my moonshot would be for geothermal electricity not to be 1% of the supply, but maybe 5, 6, why not even more? So.
Thanks, Milos. Great answers. And thank you all. So Dr. Milos Milosevic, David Reed, Ajit Menon, and Ziggy Mishner, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for joining us in. And we hope you have an excellent Pivot 2021 and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you. Thanks all of you. And thanks Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca.